Welcome to the Hillsdale Online Courses Podcast. I'm Kyle Mernon, Director of Online Learning at Hillsdale College.
And I'm Juan, Director of Marketing for Online Learning here at the college. Welcome back to the Hillsdale College Online Courses Podcast. We are on to Lecture 2 today of the Real American Founding. Lecture 2 is on equality and the natural law.
Yeah, and today we're going to really get into the core concepts that you see most famously expressed and described in the Declaration of Independence. And what Dr. West does throughout this course, I know Dr. Azerrad brought this up last time, but what he shows is what is the consensus view of the founders, right? Sure, they had some differences and disagreements and fights, but what was their political consensus? And most importantly, what was their understanding of justice?
Yeah.
Because he makes the point that every political community needs a common view of justice. And I don't think I'm breaking any news here today when that seems like something that's especially lacking in America today. We can't agree on the most fundamental things in life today. And that breakdown, that disintegration of a common understanding of justice makes it really hard to be one people and to have a functioning country.
That is probably the most important thing in this lecture. I think also the second thing that's probably very important is the founders' view of equality. This is something that we hear that word thrown around a lot today. You know, we want equality. But when you start to think about it a little bit, you realize, well, first of all, what makes us equal, right? Everybody is different. Some people are taller, some people are shorter, some people are smarter. And so what is it that makes us equal? And the founders had a very clear understanding of this. And today we do not understand the concept of equality. And I think Dr. West is brilliant in how he explains the view of the founders and why their view of equality is actually what produced a good political society.
Absolutely. We're going to get into these vibrant terms that I think too often have become slogans in American life, right? And we have a surface level understanding. I think this conversation does a great job of helping you dig a little bit deeper. So we'll move on to episode 2 of the Real American Founding. And if you're enjoying this podcast, I do hope you'll go to hillsdale.edu/course and explore our many course offerings. One suggestion I have, if you do enjoy both of these professors, is to maybe check out some of the other courses that they're involved in. Constitution 101 has 2 lectures given by Dr. West where he gets into some of these topics, but goes a little bit further into what do we mean by natural rights, and he spends even more time on the Declaration of Independence. So if you want to learn more from Dr. West, Constitution 101 is probably our most popular course, and I recommend it highly to anyone who hasn't seen it. Another recommendation is if you enjoy listening to Dr. Azerrad, he teaches in our course on civil rights, and he provides a really great lecture. It's actually the final lecture of the course on identity politics. Where did that come from, right? And we talk about new concepts of justice, right? That's probably the reigning, most important concept of justice dominating American life today. And Dr. Azerrad does a great job of explaining that and helping you understand the origins and also the real purpose behind this new idea.
And that's why this lecture is going to be very helpful for understanding why the country is so divided today, because we have 2 reigning views of justice that are competing against each other. And in the end, one of them is going to prevail over the other, because like Lincoln said, a house divided cannot stand. So remember, if you want to go to our site and view the whole course, it's hillsdale.edu/course. That's hillsdale.edu/course. And now we turn to Dr. Azerrad, who will start the first question for Dr. West.
Today, it seems to be that the presumption is that people are in need of a combination of handouts and coddling. They need to be sheltered from opinions and words that may harm their self-esteem. They need to be puffed up. They need to be protected against discrimination. The view seems to be that the default person is much more fragile than what the founders would have thought. So let's dive in to the particulars, the constitutive components of this political theory of the American founding. I know you rightly warn against reducing the founding to the Declaration of Independence, but I think we can all agree that there you find a pretty concise and clear articulation of those main principles. Starting really in the second paragraph, but what I find interesting about the Declaration is before we get to any self-evident truths or invocations of the laws of nature's God, we're told that we are already one people, that whenever it becomes necessary for one people to separate the political bands that have united them with another. America, therefore, begins, it seems to me, before we even get to the theory of the founding, we begin with, to use the language of your book, the matter of the founding, the pre-theoretical substratum of the people. What exactly constituted the American people at the time of the founding?
What I take that to mean is that the people are the individuals who collectively decide we want to be a political society together. And so the people is first constituted by voluntary agreement, but it's constituted by the agreement to form a society, to form a political order, a constitution, and so on, what goes on after that. So it's a voluntary thing. So you could say Vermont wasn't part of the one people at the beginning because Vermont was not, they were basically seceding from New York. New York didn't recognize Vermont. Congress wanted to go along with how New York viewed the matter, so they weren't part of the people. Vermont had its own independent nationhood at that time. But it's awkward because of the fact that Americans, in a sense, were part of one people with the British before that. And in fact, in the initial draft of the Declaration, we might have been one free and happy people together, I think Jefferson said. And somebody in Congress pointed out, no, that's not really quite right. Because we've already become one people. We've already seceded, so to speak, and become a separate people. And the justification for becoming one people and withdrawing your allegiance was precisely that the British government failed to do the basic work that any government has to do if it's going to be legitimate.
But surely we were not one people solely on the basis of consent. So to go back to the people of Vermont, they spoke English, they were Protestants, they had the habits of mind and of character of the rest of America. Isn't there a component of one people that is not just about consenting individual, that there are ties of blood, of language, customs, rootedness in a land, that there's a certain, perhaps a Burkean element to a people?
There's some truth to that, but the way Federalist 2 talks about it is that the question before us, the colonies, is shall we become a more perfect union? Shall we have a U.S. Constitution and adopt it? That's the question we're faced with. And so John Jay, the author of that Federalist, says, let me explain all the reasons why it makes perfect sense for Americans to become more united, more firmly united as one people. Because in a way, prior to that time, under the Articles of Confederation, there was always some ambiguity about how much of a one people are we and how much is the federal government just a kind of delegation of state reps without political power. And that's when he goes into your point. He goes into, we have common ancestry, ethnicity. We have common religion. We have common language, common manners and customs, and common political principles, which are the principles of natural rights, which he then mentions. And we've gone through this revolution together and in a way have become even more one people than we were before due to the common blood we've shed together in an honorable cause. So I think that's a perfect illustration of what the founders meant. It's that you can't just take any random individuals in the world and call them one people if they consent to be one people. Yeah, you can, except that it's not going to work. The point, in order to have a genuine community, there has to be some commonality already existing before the social compact can take place. I think Locke says at some point, there has to be trust. There has to be some mutual trust. You can say that's not part of the natural law. It's just what you need as a matter of how are people going to get along together and being willing to share in common the answer to the question of what is justice.
So you could almost say, although we're not allowed to say it in America today, is that the founders did not think that diversity was our strength.
No. No, I mean, look, they thought diversity was great if it's in the sense of, look, people are smart, some are dumb, you got men and women, they have different roles in the world and life. That's great. Diversity, we love it in that way. But being part of a union, a political union, where people are genuinely willing to help each other, defend each other, stick up for each other's rights. As a practical matter, you can't really have that without these preconditions that that Jay likes to talk about. And too much diversity will destroy the community. Madison had a nice essay in the 1790s where he talked about that. Talking about why we need a political party, why we need the Republican political party, the party of Jefferson and himself. Meaning, he said, we need to have a party to make it clear to the people what our common principles and common ground are for maintaining ourselves as a free republic. And he says, and it's that, I don't think he used the word homogeneity, but it's basically sharing of basic opinions together, having that consensus. So that's what practically makes effective.
So I can't resist asking, do you think we are still one people today, the 300 or 30 million American citizens?
It's hard to make the case that we are one people when you have so much diversity, not just in race and not just in religion, but specifically in regard to political principle.
Yeah.
The very thing you have to have unity on, according to the founders, if you're going to have a free society. You have to agree that justice means protecting everyone's equal natural rights by laws that don't make exemptions or play favorites or give special deals to people who have the right to have the ability to hire a fancy lawyer. The whole legal system needs to be set up for protection of the laws that's genuinely equal. And we don't have that. And partly it's because we've lost our sense of commonality. You know, when they immigrate, so I was reading somewhere a while ago, a couple of years ago, a man had his wife, she was naturalized. She'd come from somewhere. And she went through the naturalization ceremony. And after they got done with the formal ceremony, it took 5 minutes, whatever. Then they spent the rest of the day being handed form after form after form by these federal bureaucrats in the immigration service. You're eligible for this welfare. You're eligible for that welfare. You can get food stamps. You can get AFDC. You can get heating, subsidized heating. They were in New York City. So, of course, millions of stuff. The whole point of it was that the way that the ceremony came across to this woman was, now that I'm an American citizen, I get benefits. That's what people mean by citizenship today, often in their minds, without quite realizing it. It's just like an access to government benefits. Whereas the idea that citizenship means you are obliged to the community, obliged to obey its laws, and obliged, if need be, to serve in the military, they don't make that clear to them. And in fact, it isn't even true anymore. Mostly you don't have to do any of those things.
So let's try together to recover the founders' understanding of justice. The first concept we encounter in the Declaration of Independence is this appeal to the laws of nature and of nature's God. So can you unpack for us, what does this mean?
So first of all, the word nature, that is meant by the founders to be a term of distinction, meaning not as opposed to artificial, as opposed to something made by human beings. So like a civil law that tells you that you have the right to show up in court to sue someone. That's not nature.
It's conventional.
It's a law, but it's a conventional law. Whereas a natural law, they thought, is a law that you can figure out through your reason. You can just thinking about the nature of man, and you can determine what rules there are that should govern human life with a view ultimately to one of three things. They had three different arguments for the law of nature in the founding: God's will, your conscience, or human good and human happiness. And what they all agreed on was whatever the laws of nature, whatever the authority behind them, what they all are about is promoting human well-being, especially well-being of the community.
So what's an example of a law of nature and of nature's God, a moral commandment one can discern through reason alone?
Well, the idea that one should not harm another person's life, liberty, or property, or take away their right to pursue happiness. The natural law is the foundation, as they understood it, of the rights of the individual. And so all those human rights mentioned in the second paragraph of the Declaration are comprised under or derived from the laws of nature mentioned in the first.
So there's a duty not to kill, which translates into a right to life. They're two sides of the same coin.
Yeah. The duty not to enslave, there's a right to liberty. A duty not to interfere with others' pursuit of happiness, your right to pursue happiness. Their idea of the laws of nature is the idea that there are certain kinds of human relationships that are right by nature, that aren't specifically about individual rights. And above all, that would have to do with the relations between men and women, parents and children. They thought of that as a part of the law of nature that is not specifically about individual rights, because you're talking about children. And children aren't able to stick up for their own rights the way adults are. You can't talk about a child's right to liberty in the same sense as you can with an adult. The most you can say about a child is, yeah, when you get old enough, you'll have your right to liberty. But for now, you're under our tutelage, our control.
Do you believe in our founders' vision for America? That our republic will only survive if we are an educated and informed people who know our rights and duties. Since 1844, Hillsdale College has sought to educate all who wish to learn about these timeless principles of self-government. For more than 50 years, the college has worked to spread that mission by sending Imprimis to millions of Americans. Imprimis features some of the best speeches given at Hillsdale events, and now an audio version of the popular Speech Digest is available in a new podcast of the same name. And, like the print publication, Imprimis, the podcast, is always free. Listen to the best arguments from speakers such as Chris Rufo, Molly Hemingway, Mark Stein, and Hillsdale College President Larry Arnn, read by Hillsdale students. Subscribe today to listen to Imprimis at podcast.hillsdale.edu. That's podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you get your audio.
So they understood the laws of nature to be basically moral reasoning through reason alone, without invoking the authority of Scripture.
Yes.
But then, what's this? Who is nature's God? I mean, I've heard of the Jewish God, the Christian God, the Muslim God.
Yeah.
Who is nature's God?
Some scholars say, oh, that just shows you the founders were all deists.
And what do these scholars mean by deists?
They mean that, so nature's God then is like a God who starts the world in motion and steps back and lets things go and doesn't actually involve himself or have anything really to tell us about anything.
A first cause who says no particular providence.
Yeah. The term nature's God, as I discovered, was in fact fairly widely used even among preachers of that day. I found a sermon from, I forgot, 1679 or something, but some Puritan minister talking about at a funeral, in a funeral oration, so-and-so's life was exemplary. He had, nature's God had given him great gifts and great talents. Meaning, God, insofar as we know of God through the operation of ordinary nature, things that take place outside the realm of human making or human law.
Or revelation.
Or revelation, yes. And so the preachers made a distinction between the God that they knew of through Scripture versus the God of nature. Jefferson, who was himself not a Christian believer, used the term nature's God, I think, as a way of bridging the gap between the believers and the non-believers. Everyone could agree there is a God in one sense or other of the word. The Christians want to believe that there's a more robust kind of real God, whereas people like Jefferson, the unbelievers or the skeptics, they were quite happy to say, yes, of course, there's a fundamental divine principle or eternal principle behind the natural order of things.
So tell us a little bit, as an aside, about, I guess, the theology of the Declaration of Independence, because there are 4 distinct references to God, the first one being to the laws of nature and nature's God. What's the picture of God that emerges from the Declaration of Independence?
Well, okay, so the second is our Creator endows us with certain rights. Okay, so that's God as Creator. That is maker of the natural order of things and also the source of individual rights. Third, I think, is
with a firm reliance on his divine
firm
providence.
reliance on divine providence. In the founders' world, that word providence means divine intervention in human affairs in a way that might not be natural, might be supernatural.
Uh-huh.
And then the final We appeal to the righteousness of our intention to the supreme judge. And there is God as the rewarder and punisher of good or bad deeds. And again, it was thought appropriate to include these references to God that go beyond the merely deistic understanding.
And yet do not seem to be sectarian, that presumably not just all sects of Christians at the time, including the Catholics, could agree to that. So could Jews, presumably. It's a non-sectarian public presentation of God in this political context. Is that correct?
That's what they attempted to do, yes. That is what they wanted. But it isn't quite the God of reason alone, because it's very hard by reason alone to prove that God is a supreme judge of the world and will punish you for your misdeeds. Equally, it's very hard to prove from reason alone that God is in control of divine providence in any other respect other than supervising the natural order of things. But you realize at that point that when the founders talked about God or religion or things, they recognized this is a fundamentally important thing we have to have in our community. Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, atheist, skeptic, whatever, they all agreed on this. There was no idea that, well, I won't say that. Ethan Allen wrote a book basically saying, let's get rid of all this stupid superstition called Christianity. But most people, that was very rare. It was very much of an outlier.
But what about the success of Thomas Paine and the Age of Reason? His argument wouldn't align with the theology of the Declaration of Independence, and yet Paine was quite influential in the American Revolution. Or was it only common sense and not the Age of Reason that the Americans read?
Yeah, the Americans, that's a good way to put it, yeah. They read common sense because that appealed to the Bible, as used those passages in the first book of Samuel to show that the Bible was anti-absolute monarchy. And Paine says, look, even the Bible is on the side of the American Revolution. Now later, when he was in prison in France, he wrote The Age of Reason, and he thought, I'm going to do something for the Enlightenment, spreading the Enlightenment. And it did get published in America. Jefferson got in trouble for writing a favorable preface to that book, which he spent many years living down. But Jefferson understood, look, I'm not going to be president. I don't even want to be president of a godless nation. So that, I think, was the concern, and reasonably so.
Now, if we start turning to the other ideas, there's this, it's another line that perplexes people. What does it mean to ground your political teaching with an appeal to a self-evident truth? We hold these truths to be self-evident. Again, if one doesn't know much, one could say, well, that may be self-evident to you. It sure as hell is not to me. So what sort of an argument is that? What do they mean by a self-evident truth? And how does one justify anchoring the argument in a self-evident truth?
Jefferson's original draft was, we hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable. And Franklin says, no, put in self-evident truth. Why they did that, I don't know. To me, the word self-evident in itself, what do people mean by it? Sometimes all they mean is anybody with common sense will recognize so-and-so is true. Sometimes people will try to read into the Declaration of Independence some kind of technical philosophical argument about the nature of self-evident truths, where the truth derives from the meaning of the proposition. I don't think they had that in mind. I think they were talking about, this is obvious. This is undeniable.
But it's undeniable to them. Hence
They said we hold these truths.
Yeah, because let's be honest, who else in the world at the time, in Russia, in France, in England, would say, yeah, of course it's obvious that all human beings are created equal and that these kings and aristocrats don't have blue blood?
Yeah, well, of course, the answer is a lot of people in those countries were holding those truths to be self-evident. I mean, there had been quite a bit of an effect already of those teachings that came out of the 17th century European writers had become widespread, certainly in the educated classes by the time of the American Revolution. So, okay, they were partly appealing to that, but they thought, look, we're telling you what we think we're doing here. And as for the actual arguments behind it, that they did make some. I have a whole chapter of my book about what were the arguments they made to support the claim that all men really are created equal and that really are these natural laws and so forth. And that's pretty complicated. The Declaration was meant to be just like, this is what we think, and we're going to tell you now what follows from those principles.
And this ties back to what you were saying about them being one people. And part of what it means to be one people is to have a shared understanding of justice, is to have everyone recognize these truths as self-evident. One may hold a truth as being self-evident without, however, being able to demonstrate it. And that's fine because not every citizen is expected to be a philosopher.
Right, it's fine.
And so then we get the first great self-evident truth in the Declaration of Independence, this idea that all men are created equal. As you point out in the book, it reappears in many state constitutions. I mean, talk about another one that on the surface sounds implausible. I mean, what do you mean we're all created equal? Look at the endless inequalities between human beings.
Yeah.
In what way did the founders think we were equal, and in what ways did they think we were not equal?
Well, this is, again, one of those places where the state constitutions can help. When you look at the various versions of that same phrase that appear in the state constitutions, statements like, I think it's Virginia, all men are by nature equally free and independent. So in other words, not equal in all respects, but equally free and independent. I think Massachusetts, if I remember correctly, said all men are born free and equal. So created equals born, created equals by nature, in the case of the Virginia Constitution. And they all have the same meaning, basically. That's how God made you, and that's how nature made you. You are free or independent.
So by convention, we see them across the world in various regimes where they're oppressed, ruled against their consent, degraded as serfs and slaves, but that goes against the nature of man.
That's their claim. Now, they did also, of course, acknowledge in many ways we're unequal. Human beings are unequal, both naturally and by law and custom. And to some degree, they thought that was right and justified. So if a person is outstanding in beauty, fine, we should say, oh, they're pretty, they're good looking. If they're smart, if they're virtuous, if they're capable of great feats of endurance, all qualities that make them unequal, but also deserve praise. So in those contexts, like when it comes to hiring, when it comes to evaluating politicians,
choosing
in that
a spouse,
context, the inequality is what you're looking for. You want somebody who's better than the average.
Yeah, the argument is that these natural inequalities in endowments, native strength, the family you come from, do not translate into a right to rule others politically without their consent. That no matter how much more intelligent you are than I am, that still doesn't give you the right to rule me without my consent.
Yeah, nor can we claim that just because you're equal to others in regard to political rule, that doesn't mean you have a right to be in the government. There's a nice example of this that took place back when Nixon was president. He nominated someone for the Supreme Court, and all of his critics kept saying, this guy's a total mediocrity. We don't want him on the Supreme Court. So one of his defenders said, shouldn't we put at least somebody on the court who's mediocre? Don't we need some representation for mediocre? And of course, that was at that point that the whole nomination died. I mean, it's like Nixon embarrassed, withdrew it. But that's what it would really mean to say men are equal. Why shouldn't he be on the court? He's dumb. Why do we discriminate against dumb people? I mean, you can fancy it up. You could call it a disability. He's suffering from a disability that makes his mind mediocre. Should we discriminate against him? That's almost the logic of the modern way of talking about this. From the point of view of the founders, that's all, of course, insane. They'd laugh. They'd say it was, they'd get angry if they thought you were taking it seriously.
Yeah, we do it too now with beauty, that we're celebrating morbid obesity on par with being fit and pretty because
it's discrimination.
Yes, it's discrimination. But there are limits to equality. I mean, the two you always, even I remember this from when I was a student with you many years ago, are children and the people that Locke calls lunatics and fools. So there are some people who are not equal and are ruled without or even against their consent.
Right. And so there was always that footnote. So when the founders said we're all created equal, meaning when we become adults, and assuming we are normal adults, we should be able to be allowed to exercise our reason. So what was presumed in the claim of equality is you have at least some basic minimum capacity for reasoning. and for knowing what you're supposed to do and being able to do that.
And what is that minimum threshold?
Do you know the basic difference between right and wrong? Meaning, do you know what is right or wrong in terms of what the law allows you to do in our society? We're not asking you to do any philosophical reasoning about it. But you have to know, what are the basic rules of the society? If you can't do that, then you don't deserve to be free. And that's, of course, why people do get, or used to get, locked away. They'd be put in an asylum or treated as kind of permanent children. But nobody would have expected them to participate in politics on the same level as normal adults.
So really, who's excluded from all men are angels and beasts. But if you are a member of the human species, you should not be ruled without your consent.
Yeah, with the
an
exceptions
adult.
we just talked about, children and madmen.
Let me ask you one last thing on equality. When we talk about equality today in America, we generally mean equality of opportunity. I mean, that's the term that the general American public rallies around. It's not a term that you find in the founding. What do you think the founders would think of this idea of equality of opportunity? Is it in keeping with the theory of the founding or not?
It seems to me that it almost went without saying for the founders that there should be equality of opportunity in the sense that everyone should be in a position to acquire the things they need in life through labor, through gifts, whatever it might be. But primarily people were expected to be able to provide for themselves through their own work. That was the kind of opportunity they thought the law did need to do something about. People need to have the right to acquire property, to use the property they own, to put it to productive use, whether it be a farm or a business. Of course, those are that kind of equal opportunity, but they didn't think that we are even able, but certainly they didn't think we had to give everyone the same education, the same amount of wealth, the same. Look, many people grow up in broken families. That's not something the government can do anything about or should from their point of view. But also what's behind their attitude is they had a lot more trust in the resilience of human nature than we do today. Their idea was like a person who's a normal person with a functioning brain, who has been brought up at least in circumstances where they learn the basics of right and wrong. They should be able to function in life without a lot of help. Now, if in an extreme case, they need it, fine, we'll do it. But the presumption of all of their political theory was all adult human beings should be able to provide for themselves, and government will try to make that possible, but it won't try to create miracles and change people's backgrounds or their brains or whatever.
Yeah, and today it seems to be that the presumption is that people are in need of a combination of handouts and coddling. They need to be sheltered from opinions and words that may harm their self-esteem. They need to be puffed up. They need to be protected against discrimination. That there's the view seems to be that the default person is much more fragile than what the founders would have thought.
No, of course. For example, sexual harassment. Nobody thought that such a thing even existed until about, I don't remember when it was, 1980.
There was rape.
There was assault. There was a lot of things, home invasion,
But an off-color joke at the office party.
There was also, inappropriate touching genuinely, something that everyone would agree on, not just in the mind of the subjective observer. All that stuff was forbidden, or if not forbidden, it was discouraged. And then it suddenly became people's feelings, their self-esteem. You can't make jokes about whatever, this or that group. I don't even want to get into it because people get upset.
There's this passage I love in Frederick Douglass in 1862 wrote an essay called "What Shall Be Done with the Slaves If Emancipated?" And his answer was, do nothing with them. Basically, let them work, pray, eat, and vote. And then he offers his justification. He says, if men were born in need of crutches instead of having legs, the fact would be otherwise. He thinks that the default setting for mankind is legs, that people can stand on their own 2 feet and largely be left alone, whereas today it's the endless celebration of subsidized crutches for all, you could say.
Yeah, and that parallels the post-Civil War laws that were made in the Republican Congress. They're trying to figure out a way to transition these ex-slaves into being able to be productive laborers. And the laws they passed mostly had to do with things like making sure that they were protected in their right to own property, that it wasn't going to be stolen from them, and making sure that if crimes were committed against them, there would be a genuine prosecution and punishment. That's what they cared about. They didn't care about people discriminating against blacks in the hiring process. Their assumption was blacks can find jobs like everyone else finds jobs. And in fact, they did find jobs. Between the Civil War and the 1960s, it's often overlooked how much success there was in solving the racial problem, especially outside the South, but even in the South to some degree. It's a controversial claim, but my view of that is based in part on my acceptance of the founders' idea that, yeah, men aren't born with crutches. They're born with legs. There's a lot they can do.
We're going to end it here for now, and we'll pick it up in the next session, and we're going to get into the other big ideas we didn't talk about, most notably rights and government by consent.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Hillsdale Online Courses podcast. If you want to continue learning about America's founding or other topics, please visit hillsdale.edu/course. There you can find over 40 free online courses, including American Citizenship and Its Decline with Victor Davis Hanson, Ancient Christianity, The Rise and Fall of the Roman Republic, and many more. The courses include additional readings, study guides, fully produced videos, and you can chat with your fellow students on a dedicated forum. Upon completing a course, you will also get a certificate. All our courses are free because we believe that a virtuous citizen is the best defense for liberty. So pursue the education necessary for freedom and happiness at hillsdale.edu/course today. That's hillsdale.edu/course. Thank you for listening.